I have been in Japan for 10 weeks today. This is my 71st day. Some of you remember my second day when I came in a little bit groggy, having traveled, not being able to make the AV work, and the first class meeting of argumentation and debate, we had to do a lot of improvising. This is a little bit different. Now, before I came here, had been learning about Japan for 20 years, was fascinated by Japan, read a lot of books about Japan. In the months after I found out I'd been given a Fulbright grant to come teach in Japan for 1 year, I watched a lot of YouTube videos to learn things about Japan. And do you know what they do in all those books and all those YouTube videos? They focus on the things that are different. And there are differences. The United States and Japan are different places. But let me tell you this, now that I've been here 10 weeks, in most of the important things, the differences are not that big. People are people. They do a lot of the things the same way just about anywhere you go. There are differences, but the similarities are bigger, with one big exception. 14 years ago, I had a choice I had to make. The university that I was teaching at in the United States had a special topics class in communication, and I had to choose the topic. Now, they had only hired me at that university about 1 year before that, so I was still very new, and I said, how do I choose the topic? And they said, whatever you think the students need. So I looked around at neighboring universities. I was looking for classes they taught their communication students that we didn't have. And I picked the topic, and I taught the class. And at the end of the class, the student evaluations were returned to me, and they looked very unusual. Usually, the student evaluations talk about how I teach. You're a good teacher and I like you, or you're a terrible teacher and they should fire you. But these evaluations were different. These evaluations said, this is the most important class I've ever taken. I am using what this class teaches me every day as soon as I walk out the door. Now, I started today talking about similarities and differences, Japan and the United States, and then I changed the subject. Except I didn't change the subject. That special topics class I taught 14 years ago that they said was so important that I then had them put in the university catalog, and I've taught it ever since, was a conflict class. A class on how to handle interpersonal conflict. Now, what's the huge difference between the United States and Japan that you really can't get away from and you cannot minimize? It's how Americans and Japanese, or more broadly, how Westerners and a lot of people in East Asia handle conflict. Here, I have read about, talked about, learned about wa, harmony, the importance of holding the group together and the group being able to do things together. In the United States, one of our most important values, top priority values, is if the group is doing something that you don't like, go do your own thing. It's often repeated to children and young adults as wisdom, this saying, you can't go around trying to make everybody happy. and yet looked at a certain way, maintaining harmony is about trying to make the group happy. So those two different ways of seeing how to behave and how to fit in with other people, if you really think about it, that's the heart of how to manage conflict. And in the West and in the United States, the whole way of looking at it is fundamentally different. Over the years, from time to time, I've taught a class in intercultural communication. The textbook I have adopted more often than any other is by a Russian professor named Igor Klukhanov. Now, I'm telling you briefly about him because in his book, he has 10 principles of intercultural communication. And by the time you get to the end of the book, what he says is all intercultural communication is conflict management. Because when two people communicate and they have different cultural backgrounds, one of two things happens. Either their cultures are compatible and they get along without having to try, or each of them grew up in a community where they were taught ways of expressing themselves, ways of behaving that are not compatible. You can't do both. Behaving the right way in the one culture is the wrong and damaging way in the other culture. It's only when that happens that intercultural communication becomes tricky. So, I should tell you from the beginning, this is a class in the research and scholarship of how people in the West manage conflict. I have two big objectives for this class. Big objective number one, in the future, you may find yourself working alongside Westerners. This class is intended to prepare you for some of the things that they do that seem very hostile, very hard to understand, very illogical. It's kind of a peek inside Western thinking in situations of conflict. I think, this class almost skipped a step. This class and the scholarship of conflict is divided into two major categories. First, what are the stumbles that make conflict hard to manage? What are the complicating factors? We're not going to define conflict until next week. We'll spend a lot of time next Thursday defining what we mean by conflict. A lot of conflicts we have with other people are simple, and we solve them instantly. When you're in a crowded train station, and you're walking quickly to make your train, and someone's walking in a way they're going to collide with you, that's a conflict, but one of you changes direction and you solve it. The little conflicts are not the problem. The big, complicated conflicts that resist being managed are the problem. So one big part of the scholarship of conflict management in the West is, what is it about some conflicts that makes them so hard to solve? And it tends to come down to, do the people involved trust each other? Is there trust? Why is there not trust? And the other half of the scholarship is, what things can we do, what techniques can we use to handle conflict more constructively and effectively than we have in the past? Those often involve building trust. So when I was talking about my objective a moment ago, I said, I want to give you some understanding of the ways Westerners handle conflict. But the point I was about to make before I interrupted myself was, if you take the techniques I talk about in this class and you walk out the door and try to use them right away, they may not work at all. Because you here are from and are navigating a culture where conflict management is just different. At lunch today, I was talking with another professor who is teaching a class, and the textbook had a chapter on conflict. And she said she thought about how to cover it, and in the end decided to skip it. Because she said, it's Japan, we avoid conflict. And we will talk about avoidance of conflict as a management style. Americans avoid conflict too, sometimes. But it looks different when they do it, and they tend to be criticized for doing it. Avoiding conflict is considered immature and even cowardly. So, this may help you when you are interacting with Westerners. The other thing is, though, that cultures learn from one another. I could list a lot of things that Americans have learned as we met Japanese people, observed Japanese society. My part of the country is finally beginning to talk about putting in rail travel, train capacity, having trains that people could use to travel. And we can't talk 2 sentences about it without talking about Japan. We do learn from one another. So it is possible. In the past couple of decades, data collection in Japan has shown that the culture is moving in the direction of becoming more individualist, less collectivist. Those kinds of changes happen very slowly. And the old ways tend to still have a lot of force. The old ways are tradition. People find them comforting and meaningful. But if there is a move in the direction of becoming more individualist, you may find that during your adult years, having kind of a grip on how to manage conflict in communities that are individualist, in the end winds up being useful. It's when things like that, developments like that are new, that people sometimes do a very bad job managing them because they're not familiar and the old ways don't necessarily work. Let me tell you one more thing broadly about the content and purpose of the class, and then we will get to details. The Japanese Ministry of Education, Culture, and Technology has as a high priority to find a way that Japanese students who are learning English can also learn assertiveness. And by assertiveness, we mean in situations where there is a problem, speaking in a way that is direct. You speak confidently without avoiding, without apologizing. That's important, says the ministry, because a lot of Japanese speakers of English score very high, have a lot of knowledge, can speak beautifully, but then go in to business settings, to international meetings where negotiating is happening. And they talk with colleagues from Australia and India and the United States. And people from those cultures naturally are very comfortable being assertive. The class I just got done teaching, Argument and Debate, was one way to begin the process of growing assertiveness. This is another class that addresses it. We have a day in the class about week 7 that we will talk in some detail about assertiveness, what it looks like, and how it helps with the management of conflict. That is a big part of the reason I was brought here, that I was given the grant that I was given. So, that is a fairly major objective of this class. Not to overnight turn you into an assertive communicator. That doesn't happen overnight. But to give you some tools you can use in becoming assertive and in being effective when you are assertive. That's my big opening. Let me make sure I didn't skip anything. I didn't. I am proud of myself. Let me now get to some details. And by details, I mean the moving parts of the class, the assignments. Here we are in Google Classroom. The first thing I should tell you about this class is not currently in Google Classroom, but it's one of the simplest parts. Back in the United States, when I teach a college class, I take attendance every time it meets. Here I don't. In the United States, when I take attendance, I ask a question of the day. The question of the day is almost always a silly question, where you can give a funny answer, and the room gets to have a little laugh, and we start class in a good mood. And I ask the question of everybody individually, and they all have to come up with their own answer on the spot, no warning. Relax, I'm not going to do that to you. Let me tell you what I am going to do to you. On Wednesday at 1 p.m., I'm going to put Tuesday. On Tuesday at 1 p.m., I'm going to put the question of the day up in Google Classroom. You'll have a day to think about it, to decide what your answer is. But we're going to play by the same rule. If someone else gives the same answer you were going to give, you need to think of something else. Your best protection against that happening is to make your answer as specific as possible. Let's imagine the question of the day was, what is your favorite game? And you say, I'll say basketball. Well, the odds are high that someone else in the room is going to say basketball. But if you say, my favorite game is beach ball, basketball with my 5-year-old niece who also likes to play with her imaginary friends and her toy dinosaur, and that's your answer, nobody else in the room is giving that. You're safe. So when you see the question of the day, think of an answer that is very specific, and then nobody else will take your answer. So how is that going to fit into your grade? Well, the advice I've been given is, you can take attendance in Japanese college classes, but it's sometimes a good idea not to, because students have to do things like hunt for jobs. Students, when they miss class, very often have very good reasons. So I've made a choice not to take attendance. But the assignment, the question of the day, is for every time you are in class. So I'm going to go around the room, starting at a different point and going in a different direction every time, and ask everybody. And as you answer it, you will get credit for that day for the question of the day. Of the 9 class meetings, if you come 6 times and you answer the question 6 times, you have 100. If you come 8 times and answer 8 times, you have 100. You're being graded on, did you show up with an answer every time you were in class? And if someone else takes your answer because yours was not very specific, you've got to think of another one. That's how that assignment works. You might be wondering, What is the point of that? I'll tell you what the point of it is. I have taught college for almost 30 years. And if at the start of class everybody talks for just a moment, what I've found is people are more comfortable talking later in class, asking questions, discussing things. When you know you can't come to class and be silent the whole time, it makes it easier to speak up a second time and a third time and a fourth time. I'm not going to grade you on that. I'm just going to try to make it easier for you by breaking the ice at the start of class. So, assignment number 1, question of the day. Assignment number 2. I wasn't feeling creative, so I just named it the project. Here's the project. You will make a Google document and share it with me. On that Google document, you will write, between now and the end of the class, 3 paragraphs. Not long essays, just paragraphs. I have a model here for you to follow. If any of you know Charlie Brown and Snoopy, that comic strip, one of the characters, the one with the security blanket, is Linus. I used him for my example. The first paragraph you will write will be about a conflict that you are involved in or were involved in. Ideally, a conflict that's going on now. But if there isn't one, I understand, at some point in your life there's been one. Your first paragraph, the relationship and the conflict. Who was the conflict with? Might have been a family member, might have been a bully at school, might have been a professor here at SUDA. Talk a little about the relationship and specifically what the conflict was about. You put those 2 things, and one more thing, why the conflict was hard to solve. Just at the beginning of it, this was my relationship, this is what the conflict was about, this is why I think the conflict was hard to solve. And then you're done with the first paragraph. The other 2 paragraphs, on 2 occasions, you will take a concept we talk about in class, you'll apply it to the conflict in the first paragraph and tell me what you think it explains. We will talk in here about the different kinds of goals people have in conflict. That's the example I used. My example was Linus and his security blanket and how Lucy hates the security blanket. And in this paragraph I said, I had Linus think about the difference in goals between himself and his sister and talk about how that might help explain why the conflict was so hard to solve. So you'll take what we're learning about in here and apply it to your own conflict. And you do that twice. By the end of the class, I believe the instructions say, let me look at the instructions so I'm not doing this from memory. The deadline, I haven't looked at what day this would be. 11:59 p.m., the Monday before the final exam, is when you are to have your second paragraph done. Then I'll look at your Google Doc and I'll see 3 paragraphs. The relationship and the conflict, application number 1, application number 2, and you're done. That's the assignment. Assignment number 3. Let me back out of here. There is, in The Guardian is a newspaper in England. They have a wonderful column. They update it about every Friday, I think, called You Be the Judge. And let me tell you what is wonderful about You Be the Judge. They have conflicts, often between family members, roommates, best friends, dating couples, And when you look at the column that they put up every week, they have both sides tell their side of it in detail. What I have done, you don't have to dig around on the Guardian website. You could if you wanted to. But I've taken all the columns, and where it says, let me enlarge that just a bit. Actually, I can't. Where it says find the columns here, the columns are in a Google Drive folder. I've saved all of them as PDF files and given them a simple 2-word title. So you will pick through these and read them over. You're going to do effectively the same thing that you did with the project, only you're going to take a concept we talk about in class and you're going to apply it to their conflict and tell me what you think it explains. So there's one in there about a brother and sister who are buying a house together. And the brother says, these are older people, they're in their 50s, I think. And the brother says, I make more money, I'm contributing more money, I think that means I should have more of a say in what we do. We will talk in here about power. And when there's an imbalance in power, what that does to trying to manage conflict. You might go to that one and say, the problem here is the imbalance in power. When it comes time for you to do this assignment, what I want you to do is I want you to come here to where it says, check to see which columns are not available. Well, wait a minute. This will make more sense if I do it in this order. Turn in your report here will take you to a Google form. In the Google form, you're going to work, aren't you? Yeah. Oh, good heavens. I may have to fix that. In the Google form, what you will be able to do, there's a pull-down menu that's got all the 2-word titles. You pick which column you picked, and then there's a space that says which column or which concept are you applying to the conflict, and then a bigger one where you type in your explanation. But what that's going to do is it's going to show up in this spreadsheet. And in this spreadsheet, currently there are no responses, but when there are, the first column on the left will show which of the columns someone already chose. And if someone else already chose it, it's done. It's not available to you. This is why it is to your advantage to do this assignment earlier before the good ones get picked. Now this one also, the deadline will not come until the very end of the class. And you only have to do one column. You have to find a concept we talked about in class that can explain what was happening in that conflict and which might give some direction to how they could handle the conflict better. The last of the assignments. Let me come back to classroom real quick. This is not showing everything, which is odd. Let me bump. See if I go out and come back in if it refreshes. Final exam. So the final exam, let's see, did I put that in the wrong place? I did. Up here at the top, I didn't put those down with the category. I'll fix that this afternoon. Assignment instructions is for the final exam. Final exam essay questions is also for the final exam. Anybody who is back who took the argumentation class, the final exam format is identical. For people who were not in the argumentation class, here is the format. Every time the class meets, I will start with essay questions. I will say, here are the 3 or 4 essay questions that cover what we will talk about today. Then we will have our 90 minutes of class. At the end of class, I'll take a minute and show you the essay questions again. And that's a real good time, if you're not sure how to answer one of them, to raise your hand and say, now what about, now what if? What you will then do on the day we take the final exam, you can show up already having chosen one question that you really know how to answer, you feel very confident. You can show up and just answer that question. Now, you do not get to consult notes, so it needs to be a question that you're so confident of that if I just put the question and a blank piece of paper in front of you, you think you would do a good job on the answer. The other question, and the final exam is only 2 questions long. The other question, you will draw from a pile. And you will have all the questions. They're going to be in that spreadsheet that says final exam essay questions. You will have seen every question before. But you get to pick a question that you like and you want to answer. And then your other question, you draw from a pile. So it's important that you be pretty confident answering all the questions, because one of them chosen at random will be 50% of your grade. The other 50% of your grade will be a question you're sure you can do a very good job on. So I have at this point talked through all the assignments in this class. The question of the day, which is only a tiny, tiny bit of the class grade, the project, you be the judge, and the final exam. I'm going to pause here and open the floor for you to ask me questions about any of it. The one other thing I will encourage you with, last time around on a few of the assignments, as we got closer to when they needed to get done, it became clear that people were confused. It's okay if you don't want to ask your question here in the room. But I do have office hours. I'm in my office from 8:30 to 10 and from 3 to 4 on Wednesdays. I also answer email. I try to answer it pretty quickly. As you discover details about any of these assignments that you're not sure how to do, please ask. Please don't be embarrassed about asking. I know that sometimes I'm not clear, and I will fill in whatever you don't understand. With the balance of our time, let me get the projector out of my face. And I am going to spend some time telling you some things about me. This is similar to the talk that I gave on September 6th. Some parts of it have been reworked. If you were here for that first talk, you're going to get a second hearing of a lot of it. But I am hoping these are things that will let you know what to expect as this class unfolds. There are 3 things you should know about me, and with each of them, there are mistaken ideas, misunderstandings that you might have that I want to address. I want to explain how those are not right, and fill in some information that is right. The first thing you should know about me, I'm an American college professor. Now, the misconceptions that sometimes go with this. Some people expect that a college professor will be very formal, that this will be someone who's older. I am fairly old, I'm 53. This will be someone who expects to be addressed by a title, so I want you to call me doctor every time. I do have a doctorate, but I don't care if people call me by that. It just seems kind of strange. I'm not a medical doctor. A second misconception people have is that I must have been, if I'm a college professor and have a PhD, I must have been really good in school. And I always got an A in every class. The truth is, I graduated high school in the bottom half of my class. And when I was in college, the grade point system in the United States is 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. 0 is an F, 1 is a D, 2 is a C, 3 is a B, 4 is an A, and an A is the best, and an F is the worst. My average through the 5 years it took me to finish college was a little over a 2. I only got up to a B average in college my last semester before I graduated. Now, I have since been given the good advice that if I tell you all of this, you might think, he must be a terrible professor. What kind of damaged goods are we getting here? So I was advised to add in something I'm not really comfortable saying because you're going to think I'm bragging. I'm not. I just want you to have a little confidence in me. In the past 15 years, I've been given campus-wide outstanding teaching awards 5 times, an average of once every 3 years. So whatever I was like as a student, when my teaching is evaluated, and my teaching also had to be evaluated for the Fulbright grant, the evaluations have been good. That's not to say I'm a perfect teacher. It's not to say if you have a problem in this class learning that you're wrong and I'm right. If something I do is not helping you, please tell me. I want to adjust it to where you will have a good experience. The third thing that people sometimes expect when they talk to a college professor is that I will have all the answers. Let me say this about that. What I am going to teach is what research says about conflict and about how Westerners manage conflict. Now, that research is social science research. Social science research is done by recruiting a sample of the population. And then, whatever your method is, you do something to collect data, and you look for statistical differences in the responses. It does not produce right answers and wrong answers. It's a lot more like forecasting the weather. When you forecast the weather, you know the probability that it might rain in the afternoon. When you do social science research, you know the probability that talking this way in a conflict might make it worse. But I'm going to have a lot of moments in this class where you might ask a really good question, and I might say, you know, we're not sure. The research is kind of all over the place. So, more than once, you may want to know something, and I may not have a clear answer for you. There are people who give clear answers that will make you feel better. They mostly make them up, and they write books with them, and those books make them a lot of money. But you can't count on them. They're not trustworthy. And they honestly make me really angry because they exploit people. The real answers tend to be not very satisfying. We have some idea what sometimes works, and we keep at it and we keep trying to make it better. So those are things you should know about me as a professor. The second thing you might want to know about me, not only am I from the United States, but I'm from Texas. There are misconceptions about Texas. When you hear I'm from Texas, you might think that I grew up riding a horse to school every day. You might think that everybody in my family has a gun, and we get up every day and look out the window and shoot the first thing we see. I should tell you, I've held a gun in my hand one time in my life. I wasn't in Texas at the time. I was in South Carolina. And a friend of mine had me come visit. His father had just bought a gun, took it out to show me and said, "Here, hold it." To be polite, I took it. I said, "Yes, that certainly is a gun." And I handed it back. It's the only time I've ever held a gun. I have been on a horse. The last time I was on a horse, I was 8 years old, 45 years ago, at camp. Texas is a big place. If you see cowboy movies, it seems like the whole place is one big desert. But I lived in a part of the state that looked a lot like this. It was all forest. And if any of you know, for example, from American music, if any of you know Beyonce, she's from Texas. Texas has a lot of people who are different in a lot of ways. What are some things that are true about me being from Texas? Texans tend to be very, I don't know if this word will translate. I was about to say blunt. A better word might be direct. We're not very careful of other people's feelings. We often say things in a way that will make other people feel hurt. And Texans brag about that. We speak the truth. And if you're bothered by the truth, grow up. You just need to get stronger so you can handle the truth. And I'm not saying that's the right way to communicate, but I am saying the more people from Texas you meet, the more you will see that is the pattern. When I first moved to Oregon, which is where I live in the United States now, I teach at a university called Bushnell in Eugene, Oregon. It's funny, around Tokyo, I've seen a lot of people with University of Oregon sweatshirts, the green with the big yellow O. That's right across the street from where I work. All of that to say, I had been living in Oregon about a year. My boss called me in for a meeting and said, "You are hurting the feelings of too many people that you work with. You need to learn to be a little bit more gentle." And that was in the United States. I came here 10 weeks ago and was very nervous because I'm a Texan. I sometimes hurt people's feelings, and now I'm in Japan. And I don't know, maybe everybody's mad at me, but it seems like it's going okay so far. But that's something you should know. When you know I'm from Texas, there are a lot of wrong ideas you could get. And then there's one really big right idea you could get. I may sometimes, in talking to you about something related to the class, be very direct. If so, and if you feel hurt, please just keep in mind that probably has more to do with where I'm from and the way I was brought up. It's not anything about you. One other thing I might as well mention here. In the United States, at my university in Oregon, I was known as one of the hardest teachers on campus. And more people failed my classes than failed any other professors on campus. But I am new to this campus still. It's my second term here, not my first anymore, but I still don't have the background. I still don't have the experience teaching you that I would need to be confident that I could design assignments and classes to really push you. I think if you're going to be a tough professor and demand a lot from your students, Before anything else, I have to know what I'm doing, and I haven't been here long enough to know what I'm doing. And I say that to reassure you. I plan to grade very easily. A lot of these assignments, if you just complete them and turn them in, and you paid attention to the instructions and did what they said, you're going to get full credit. So you should not worry that I am going to be very precise or picky. I'm not going to pick your English apart. If you want feedback on your English, I can give it. But unless you've signaled to me that you do, if I can understand what you're saying, that will be enough. The third and final thing you should know about me is that I am a Christian. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this than on the first two things for the same reason I did in the argument class, because it will come up again, because it comes up in the research about conflict. The number of people in North America who identify as Christian is falling. Some people say by 2070 it'll be a minority, less than 50%. Yet, we said a little while ago, even after culture moves on, the tradition stays the tradition. And so you will find in conflict, we talk about things like how to confront somebody, how to forgive somebody. Those concepts are very powerfully informed by Christianity. So what I am going to do today, I'm going to take a couple of misconceptions people commonly have, and when I get to the end of it, I'm going to tell you a quick little story that pulls all of it together. And then I'm going to open the floor to questions one more time, and that will be the end of class. Here are the misconceptions. There are 3 of them. First, Christianity is a religion. There are lots of religions in the world. Christianity is not any different from the other ones. It's just the one you chose. Second misconception. You're a Christian because you're American, obviously. Americans are Christians, Arabs are Muslims, and Japanese people tend to be either Shinto or Buddhist, although mostly that's our grandparents, not us. Third misconception. Religious people do spooky things like worship, like pray, they have faith, and they do all of that because they can't handle reality, and they reject science. So those 3 misconceptions. One of many religions, you're Christian because you're American, and religious people are disconnected from reality. Let me take those in turn. It is a religion, and there are lots of religions. Actually, Christianity is categorically different from the others. Most world religions are a lot like the experience of having a job. You apply for a job, and if you have the qualifications, you get hired. You show up to work, your boss gives you instructions. If you do the work right, then you get raises in pay and you get promoted. If you do the work wrong, you probably will get your pay cut. You may get demoted to more menial jobs. If you really do the job wrong, they'll fire you. If you do it really, really wrong, like you steal their money or you break their property, they might take you to court or call the police. Most world religions, they give you things to do. And as you do the things right, you will be rewarded. And if you do the things wrong, you will be punished. And if you do things really, really wrong, there's a big punishment. And one misconception people have about Christianity is that Christianity is that. You do good things. You help the poor. You say kind things to other people. You raise your children right. If you do all those, you'll be rich and healthy and go to heaven. If you do bad things, if you lie, if you steal, if you kill, you'll be punished and punished and punished. And if you do really bad things, like kill someone, you'll go to hell. That isn't Christianity. Christianity is a lot more similar to adoption. being adopted. Here, in about 3 minutes, is the belief system. The universe has a creator. The creator is all-powerful, can do anything. The creator is all-knowing. Nothing is unknown to the creator. The creator is perfectly loving and loves everybody. The creator is also perfectly good. Now, that last one, being perfectly good, makes things a little complicated. If you know someone who is perfectly, or not perfectly good, if you know someone who's a good person, they do good things. They're kind, they help. If they're really good, they will not stand by while bad things happen in front of them. If they see someone stealing, they'll say, "Stop that." If they see someone being cruel, they'll step in and say, "Don't do that." Well, if God is perfectly good, then God's standard for putting a stop to wrongdoing gets a lot higher, and the wrongdoing it takes gets smaller and smaller and smaller. That good person you know might see something wrong but not be able to do anything about it, but God is all-powerful. That person you know might not know something bad is happening, but God is all-knowing. Put those together, perfectly good, all-powerful, and all-knowing, and what you get, anybody who is guilty of wrongdoing of any kind cannot be in God's presence. Now, the complication there is God still loves everybody. So what's to be done? Christianity has a lot to say about a man named Jesus, and I can't give you the full explanation in the 3-minute version of the faith. But I can say what Jesus did and offered to the human race as a gift for everybody means that all any of us have to do, all I had to do to be accepted, is to say, I am guilty of wrongdoing. I cannot be in God's presence because of it. But what Jesus did and offered to me as a gift means that I can. And once I realize I need that, and once I accept that gift, then I am, in God's eyes, one of God's children. I have a place of belonging in God's household, in God's family. Now, I started off by saying Christianity is categorically different from other religions. Christianity does teach you should do good things, you shouldn't do bad things, but for a different reason. I hope that you were raised by a father and mother who did a really good job and loved you and you feel good about your upbringing. If that's true, then I bet from time to time you've started to do something but then thought, wait, my mother and father did not raise me to do this, and they would be sad if I did this. And you've chosen not to because you respect them. If you understand that moment and that experience, then you understand Christianity. Christians, when they govern their behavior, do not do it out of fear. They do it because they have been adopted into a family and their reason to be afraid has been done away with. That's misconception number one. That will come up in the discussion of forgiveness in the context of conflict. Because the faith also teaches, if you were forgiven that much, you have to forgive other people. Second misconception. Of course you're Christian, you're from the United States. Your parents were Christian, that's the only reason you are. If you'd been born in India, you would have been Hindu. Actually, of the major world religions, all the rest have their largest population near the place where they were founded. The largest percentage of Muslims is around Saudi Arabia. Now, there's a big Muslim population in Indonesia, and there's a growing Muslim population in North America. But still, the core of it is where it was founded. Same for Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, all the major world religions except Christianity. South America and Africa have the largest numbers, and the explosive growth right now is happening in China. North America, Europe are on the decline. And it was founded in the Middle East, where it still exists, but not very much. It is a faith who in its history, it went wherever people were not yet wealthy and comfortable. Once a part of the world becomes wealthy and comfortable, Christianity starts to die off. Third and final misconception. Christians do spooky things. Worship, pray, have faith, because they have a hard time with reality and don't like science. I have about 3 things to say here, and then I'm going to start to wrap up the class. The first thing, I do have a doctorate, and it's not from a Christian college. It's from the University of Georgia. I finished my doctorate in 2003. In the rankings from that year, it was the top graduate program in the communication field. I have good friends who are professors of biology, chemistry, physics, math, and Christian, and none of them see a conflict between their beliefs and their science. There are Christians in the world who reject science. There are Christians in the world who say a whole lot of stupid stuff. It doesn't mean anything about the faith itself. Second thing that I want to say about that, everybody has faith. Everybody. The most staunch atheist puts their faith in something. Scientists who use equipment that they did not invent are putting their faith in something invented and designed and manufactured by somebody else. Faith just means at the point where you can no longer explain, you decide where to put your trust. It doesn't mean you stop trying to find out what the explanation is. There are questions in Christian teaching that require faith, but we continue to try to do research and scholarship and find out the answer. It's just as of now, we may not have it. Then there is worship. Everybody worships. I'm real quick going to define worship, and this time it really is going to be quick, and then I'm going to start to tell my story. You have priorities in your life. Some things are more important, some things are less important. Whatever the top priority above everything else is, that's what you're worshiping. There are parents whose top priority in their life is their children. They are worshiping their parenthood. There are musicians whose top priority in their life is their music. They are worshiping their talent as musicians. There are athletes who worship their sport. There are business people who worship their money. What I do is I worship God. And now let me tell you my story just real quick. In 2006, it was 2004, 2 years earlier, I had a large enough student loan debt, and it was growing so rapidly that I did the math and I didn't think I would ever be able to pay it off. So if there's anyone here who's got a student loan burden, I have been there and I know what that's like. And for a long time I prayed about it, and I prayed, God, help me find a solution to this. God, this debt is crushing me. I came to the point where I changed that prayer. I prayed something different. I said, God, it is possible that I'm going to go bankrupt because of this student loan debt. It's possible I'm going to get kicked out and not have a place to live. But it's possible that what you want is someone who has no money who can tell about you and minister to other people with no money. And if that's what you want, I'm okay with that. And I reached the place in my heart where I really felt that way. And inside the week, I got a call from my aunt, my father's sister. My grandmother had died about 2 years before, and my aunt said they had settled her estate. And we all got together, and she put in my hand a check. And that check eliminated my student debt. Around that time, I was still working on my doctorate. I had not finished it. When you work on a doctorate, at the end, you have to write a book. It's called a dissertation. I'd been working on mine, and it was stuck. And I was running out of time. It was starting to get scary. And I always said, if I could ever just figure out what my dissertation is about, I could write it in 6 weeks. I had all this research, but I did not know what direction it was going. And so one night, I had a little talk with God. And before I had said, God, I'm stuck. Please help me finish. Please help me figure out how to solve this. And I hope this is going to sound familiar. That night what I prayed was, God, it might be that your plan for me is for me to fail at this. And I will know other people in my life who fail, and I'll be able to comfort them, and I'll be able to counsel them because I failed at this, and I will be useful to you that way. And if that's what you have in mind, I'm okay with it. And about a week later, I was sitting watching TV, which I don't do very often. I had a pad in my lap because I was starting to write down ideas for the classes I was teaching the next term, and boom, it hit me. And I started to write, and I filled that page, and I flipped it over, and I filled the next page, and I looked down, and I knew what my dissertation was about. And I wrote it. It didn't take 6 weeks, it took 3. The last part of the story. In September of 2021, I submitted my application for this Fulbright grant, and I had a talk with God. And I said, God, I don't want to do this to be a tourist. I don't want to go to Japan and go to a bunch of shotengai and eat a bunch of sushi and just basically make a gaijin fool of myself. I want to go if you've got a purpose there for me, if you've got work you want me to do. So if I'm going there to be a tourist, I trust you to close the door and keep me here. And every time in the whole process of doing this Fulbright grant, it looked like something was going wrong. I just stopped and said, God, if you've got work for me to do there, then this problem's going to go away. I know if you want me there, no power on earth can keep this door shut. And here I am. And that is the end of my story. The 2 last things I want to say to wrap that up. Every morning, not long after I get up, I make a very strong cup of coffee and I sit down with my Bible and I take a little time and I pray. I pray for each of you. I do it every morning. If at any point you've got something in your life you're struggling with or you're worried about, you want to tell me about it, and you don't have to tell me details, I'll pray for you for what it's worth. The other thing I do, I am learning how to say this in Japanese. I've made some progress, not enough yet, but we're getting there. This is an old blessing that comes out of the Bible, and I end class with it every time. And actually, I'm going to pause this, because I said I would open the floor for questions one more time, which I'm going to do. It's a class in conflict, how Westerners handle conflict. The assignments are the question of the day, the project, you be the judge, and the final exam. It's mostly lecture. The lecture outline is in the syllabus. The syllabus is up in Classroom. I will love it, love it, love it when you come to class. If in the middle of the lecture, if you raise your hand and ask questions about what if and what about, and I had this experience once, what could I have done? That's the class. Is there anything you want to ask me now?
Until when do we need to buy textbooks?
Thank you for that. I completely forgot that. So, that's actually something I need to do. You want some good news? There is no textbook that you have to buy. Here in the syllabus, quit that. Here in the syllabus, Here in the syllabus, you will see that there are readings. There is Krumrie Folks, there is Dews, Gottman and Gottman. Down here, required readings. It says they're posted in the materials topic, but they're not yet. I knew I was forgetting something, but that's what I'll do today between 3 and 4. There are assigned readings. They will all be posted in Classroom. They're free. So before next week, there will be Krumrie Folks, Intercultural Communication for the Community College. She's right across town from me, and her chapter on conflict is superb. So that's the assigned reading for next week. For the weeks that follow, Michael Dews at the University of Arizona, The Art of Conflict Management. We look at several chapters, and you have a free copy of that, or you will, the chapters from it. The Gottmans, we're going to talk about the Gottmans when we get to conflict in romantic relationships. And then this Hunter, Goody, Ort, and Daltmeyer pamphlet is the basics of assertiveness. All of those will be in Google Classroom by the end of the day today. Thank you for that question. That helped the whole room. That's the kind of question I love, by the way. Any question is good, but when you ask the question, it helps everybody. Any others?